Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. The familiar scent of polished wood and floor wax hit me as I stepped into the high school gymnasium. Memories flooded back, a mix of nostalgia and anxiety churning in my stomach. Courtney's hand tightened around mine, her excitement palpable. "Can you believe it's been 20 years?" she whispered, her eyes sparkling as she took in the decorations and familiar faces. I nodded, forcing a smile. Time flies. As we made our way through the crowd, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I'd done well for myself since graduation, building a successful business from the ground up. My strict adherence to ethical practices had earned me respect in the industry, even if it meant slower growth at times. "Jonathan, Courtney, you two haven't aged a day." I turned to see our old classmate, Sarah, beaming at us. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I felt some of my tension melt away. "Sarah, it's great to see you," I said, genuinely pleased. "How have you been?" As we caught up, my eyes scanned the room, searching for familiar faces. That's when I saw him, Richard. My stomach clenched as our gazes locked across the crowded gym. Richard sauntered over, a smug grin plastered on his face. Well, if it isn't Jonathan and Courtney, the golden couple of Westfield High. I straightened my posture, determined not to let him see how much his presence bothered me. "Richard, good to see you." Courtney's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Richard, you're looking well." His eyes lingered on Courtney a moment too long before he turned back to me. "So, Jonathan, I hear you've been making waves in the business world. Still playing by all the rules?" The condescension in his voice was barely veiled. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was proud of my ethics. "Some of us believe in succeeding the right way, Richard." He laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. "Right, because that's gotten you so far. Tell me, how does it feel to watch others zoom past you while you're stuck in the slow lane?" Before I could respond, Courtney interjected. "I think Jonathan's done quite well for himself, Richard. Not everyone measures success by the size of their bank account." Richard's eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite place. Of course. My apologies, Courtney. I'm sure you're very satisfied with Jonathan's achievements." The way he emphasized satisfied made my skin crawl. I was about to say something when another classmate approached, breaking the tension. "Hey guys, there's a toast happening in 5 minutes. Don't want to miss it." Grateful for the interruption, I nodded. "We'll be right there." "Thanks." As our classmate moved on, Richard raised an eyebrow. "Well, duty calls. Enjoy the evening, lovebirds. I'm sure we'll chat again soon." We watched him walk away, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Courtney squeezed my hand. "Don't let him get to you, John. He's just jealous." I nodded, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. "You're right. Let's go join the others." As we made our way to the center of the gym, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Richard's words, his look, it all felt like a prelude to something bigger. But I pushed those thoughts aside. This was supposed to be a night of celebration and reconnection. I wouldn't let Richard's presence ruin it for us. The evening progressed, a blur of familiar faces and shared memories. I found myself relaxing, enjoying conversations with old friends and catching up on 2 decades of life. Courtney was by my side, her laughter ringing out as we reminisced about our high school days. "Remember when you asked me to prom?" she said, her eyes twinkling. "You were so nervous. You knocked over an entire display in the cafeteria." I chuckled, the memory vivid in my mind. How could I forget? I was covered in lime jello for the rest of the day. She leaned in, her voice softening. "It was adorable. That's when I knew you were the one." Her words warmed my heart, and I pulled her closer. Despite the ups and downs of married life, moments like these reminded me why we'd made it this far. The DJ's voice cut through the chatter, announcing it was time for karaoke. A few brave souls made their way to the stage, belting out off-key renditions of 80s classics. Courtney and I watched, laughing and cheering along with the crowd. Suddenly, Courtney straightened up. "I'll be right back," she said, a strange look in her eyes. Before I could respond, she was gone, weaving through the crowd towards the stage. I frowned, wondering what she was up to. Courtney had always been spontaneous, but something about this felt off. The current song ended, and the DJ's voice boomed through the speakers. "All right, folks. Looks like we have a special request. Let's give it up for Courtney." My jaw dropped as I watched my wife take the stage. This wasn't like her at all. She'd always hated public speaking, let alone singing in front of a crowd. Courtney grabbed the microphone, her eyes scanning the room until they locked on. "Richard?" A chill ran down my spine. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I have an announcement to make." The room fell silent, all eyes on Courtney. I felt my heart racing, a sense of dread building in my chest. "For years, I've been living a lie," she continued. "I've been pretending to be happy, to be satisfied with the life I've built. But the truth is, I've been in love with someone else." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Courtney's eyes found mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Sorrow? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold determination. "Jonathan," she said, her voice carrying across the silent gym. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." With a theatrical flourish that seemed completely out of character, Courtney strode across the stage and down the steps. The crowd parted as she made her way directly to Richard. Time seemed to slow as I watched my wife, the woman I'd loved for over 2 decades, throw her arms around Richard's neck and kiss him passionately. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. I felt like I was drowning, the noise fading to a dull roar in my ears. Courtney pulled away from Richard, turning to face me. Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Jonathan, I found my true love. Goodbye." I stared at her, unable to form words. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of sick joke. Richard's arms snaked around Courtney's waist, pulling her close. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Sorry, old friend," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I guess the best man won after all." I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Sarah, her face a mask of concern. "Jonathan, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Her words faded into the background as I watched Courtney and Richard make their way to the exit, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. As they reached the door, Courtney glanced back. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Regret? But then it was gone, replaced by a cold mask of indifference. And just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing alone in a sea of pitying faces, my world crumbling around me. The next few hours passed in a blur. I vaguely remember people offering condolences, their words of comfort falling on deaf ears. All I could focus on was the burning need to confront Courtney and Richard, to demand answers. I found myself outside, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm raging inside me. That's when I saw them, huddled together near Richard's ostentatious sports car. Without thinking, I stormed over, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "What the hell is going on?" They turned, Richard's face splitting into a smug grin while Courtney at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Ah, Jonathan," Richard drawled. "Come to congratulate us?" I ignored him, focusing on Courtney. How could you do this? 20 years of marriage, thrown away for him? Courtney's eyes hardened. "Don't act so shocked, Jonathan. Our marriage has been dead for years. You were just too blind to see it." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? We were happy. We have a life together, a daughter." Richard chuckled, the sound grating on my last nerve. "Oh, poor, naive Jonathan. Always seeing what you want to see. Courtney's been unhappy for a long time. She just needed someone to show her what she was missing." I felt my control slipping. "You son of a—" Now, Richard interrupted, his tone maddeningly calm. "Let's not do anything you'll regret. After all, we wouldn't want to tarnish that squeaky clean reputation of yours, would we?" Something in me snapped. Before I knew what was happening, my fist connected with Richard's jaw. The satisfying crunch was followed by gasps from nearby onlookers. Richard stumbled back, his hand flying to his face. For a moment, shock registered in his eyes, quickly replaced by a calculating gleam. You shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I barely registered the phones pointed in our direction, capturing the whole sordid scene. Courtney stepped between us, her face a mask of fury. Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you've just done? I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. What I've done? You're the one who just blew up our entire life on a whim. She laughed, the sound cold and bitter. A whim? You think this was a spur-of-the-moment decision? We've been planning this for months, Jonathan, waiting for the perfect moment to show you just how pathetic you really are. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Planning? What are you talking about? Richard, having recovered from the punch, stepped forward. Allow me to explain, since you seem to be a bit slow on the uptake. You see, Jonathan, your precious ethical business practices, they've made you weak, vulnerable, and we're going to exploit every single one of those vulnerabilities. I shook my head, struggling to process what I was hearing. You can't be serious. Courtney, think about Eva, our daughter. We'll be just fine, Courtney interrupted. In fact, she'll be better off without your suffocating morality holding her back. Richard pulled out his phone, tapping the screen with a flourish, and uploaded. That little display of violence? It's already making the rounds online. I wonder how your clients will react when they see their ethical businessman losing control like that. The realization of what they'd done hit me like a ton of bricks. My reputation, my business, everything I'd worked so hard for was about to come crashing down. Courtney's voice cut through my thoughts. Oh, and Jonathan? Expect divorce papers soon. I'll be taking half of everything, of course, and sole custody of Eva. I stared at her, unable to reconcile this cold, calculating woman with the person I thought I'd married. You can't do this. I won't let you. Richard laughed. And how exactly do you plan to stop us? Face it, Jonathan, you're finished. In business and in life. It's time for you to step aside and let the real players take over. I watched as they turned and walked away, arm in arm, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on me, and I felt my knees buckle. As I sank to the ground, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. In the span of a few hours, I'd lost my wife, my daughter, and quite possibly my entire livelihood. And for what? Because I'd chosen to play by the rules? For the first time in my life, I found myself questioning everything I believed in. If this was the reward for being ethical and honest, what was the point? As I sat there, surrounded by the whispers and stares of my former classmates, a cold determination began to take root. If Richard and Courtney wanted to play dirty, they were about to learn that two could play at that game. The old Jonathan, the one who believed in always taking the high road, died in that parking lot. In his place rose someone new, someone willing to do whatever it took to reclaim what was rightfully his. Let them think they'd won. Their victory would be short-lived. Because now, the gloves were coming off. The morning after the reunion, I woke to a pounding headache and the harsh reality of my new life. My phone buzzed incessantly, a flood of notifications pouring in. With a sense of dread, I unlocked the screen. The video of me punching Richard had gone viral overnight. My inbox was flooded with messages from clients, business partners, and the media. I clicked on one from my biggest client, my stomach churning as I read. Jonathan, we need to talk. This behavior is unacceptable. Call me ASAP. I dialed his number with shaking hands. He picked up on the first ring. Jonathan, what the hell were you thinking? Tim, I can explain. Save it. I've seen the video. We can't be associated with this kind of behavior. I'm sorry, but we're terminating our contract. Tim, please. This isn't who I am. You know me. I thought I did. Goodbye, Jonathan. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, numb. One by one, I watched as my carefully built empire began to crumble. My business partner, Alex, burst into my home office, his face pale. Jonathan, we're in deep shit. Have you seen the news? I nodded, unable to form words. What the hell happened last night? This isn't like you at all. I ran a hand through my hair, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind. Courtney, she left me. For Richard. It was all a setup. Alex's eyes widened. Jesus, I'm sorry, man, but we need to do damage control, fast. Our stocks are plummeting. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered, putting it on speaker. Mr. Wilson? This is Sandra from Channel 5 News. We'd like to get your statement on the incident at your high school reunion. I exchanged a panicked look with Alex. No comment, I said. Hanging up. We need a plan, Alex said. A press conference, maybe? Explain your side of the story? I shook my head. It won't matter. Richard and Courtney, they planned this. They wanted to destroy me. Why? What could they possibly gain from this? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. A text from Courtney. Hope you're enjoying your 15 minutes of fame. By the way, my lawyer will be in touch. I want half of everything. And Eva. I showed Alex the message, my hands shaking with rage. She can't do this, Alex said. We'll fight it. Get the best lawyers. With what money? I interrupted. Our clients are jumping ship. The company's tanking. I've got nothing left. Alex's face hardened. Then we fight dirty. You've always played by the rules, Jonathan. Maybe it's time to change the game. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. You mean? I mean we do whatever it takes to save what's left of your life. Richard and Courtney want to play hardball? Let's show them how it's done. For a moment, I hesitated. Everything I'd built had been founded on ethical principles. Could I really throw that all away? Then my phone buzzed again. Another client terminating their contract. Another nail in the coffin of my career. I looked at Alex, a cold determination settling over me. You're right. No more Mr. Nice Guy. It's time to fight fire with fire. Alex nodded, a smile on his face. That's the spirit. Now, let's start planning our counterattack. As we sat down to strategize, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of dread and excitement. The old Jonathan was gone, destroyed in a single night of betrayal. In his place stood a man willing to do whatever it took to reclaim what was rightfully his. Richard and Courtney had no idea what they'd unleashed. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. 2 weeks after the reunion, I found myself in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. The place reeked of stale beer and broken dreams, a fitting backdrop for my current state of mind. I nursed a whiskey, waiting. The door creaked open, and a familiar face walked in. Mark, my old friend from college, slid into the booth across from me. Jesus, Jonathan, you look like hell. I managed a weak smile. Good to see you too, Mark. He signaled the bartender for a drink. So, what's this urgent meeting about? Your message was pretty cryptic. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I need your help. You still working as a private investigator? Mark nodded slowly. Yeah, why? I need dirt on Richard Blackwell. Anything you can find. Business dealings, personal life, the works. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Richard Blackwell? The tech mogul? What's this about, John? I took a deep breath, then spilled the whole sordid story. Mark listened in stunned silence, his drink forgotten. Holy shit, he said when I finished. That's fucked up, man. Tell me about it. So, will you help me? Mark ran a hand through his hair. John, what you're asking, it's not exactly legal. Neither is what they did to me, I shot back. Come on, Mark. You know Richard's dirty. We just need to prove it. He sighed. All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But John, are you sure about this? This isn't like you. I downed the rest of my whiskey. The old me is gone, Mark. They made sure of that. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I worked tirelessly. He'd feed me information, and I'd piece it together, building a comprehensive dossier on Richard's activities. One night, Mark burst into my apartment, his face flushed with excitement. I've got it, John. The smoking gun. He spread a stack of documents on my coffee table. Richard's been embezzling funds from his own company. Millions of dollars, funneled through offshore accounts. I pored over the documents, my heart racing. This is it, Mark. This is how we take him down. There's more, Mark said. I've got proof of at least 3 affairs, including one with his CFO's wife. I looked up, a plan forming in my mind. We need to get this to the media. Anonymously, of course. Mark hesitated. John, Once we do this, there's no going back. Are you absolutely sure? For a moment, I saw a flash of my old self, the ethical businessman who believed in playing fair. But then I remembered Courtney's cruel smile, Richard's mocking laughter. My jaw clenched. I'm sure. They took everything from me, Mark. It's time I returned the favor. We spent the next few days carefully crafting our strategy. Every piece of evidence was meticulously organized, every leak planned to maximize impact. The night before we were set to release the information, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the file that would destroy Richard's life. A part of me still hesitated, wondering if this was truly the right path. My phone buzzed. A text from Courtney. Court date set for next month. Hope you're ready to lose everything. Again. Any lingering doubt vanished. I picked up my phone and dialed Mark's number. It's time, I said when he answered. Release everything. You got it, boss. Let's light this powder keg. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Tomorrow, Richard's carefully constructed world would come crashing down, and I'd be there to watch it burn. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing off the hook. I grabbed it, my heart pounding as I saw the flood of notifications. Our plan had worked better than we could have imagined. Hashtag Richard Blackwell scandal was trending nationwide. Every major news outlet was running the story. I turned on the TV, flipping to a 24-hour news channel. Tech mogul Richard Blackwell is at the center of a massive scandal today, the anchor announced. Anonymous sources have provided evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and multiple extramarital affairs. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. It's working. Richard's stock is in freefall. Turn on Channel 7. I switched channels just in time to see Richard himself, looking haggard and desperate, being ambushed by reporters outside his office. Mr. Blackwell, is it true you've been embezzling company funds? What do you have to say about the allegations of multiple affairs? Richard pushed past them, his face a mask of barely contained rage. No comment. These are baseless accusations. My lawyers will be addressing this shortly. I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The hunter had become the hunted. My phone rang again. Alex. Jonathan, are you seeing this? Every second of it, I replied. It's insane. Richard's company is tanking. The board is calling for his resignation. And get this, the SEC has just announced they're launching a full investigation into his finances. I leaned back, closing my eyes. Good. Let him feel what it's like to lose everything. John, Alex's voice turned serious. What about Courtney? She's implicated in this too. The affairs, the offshore accounts. She's not coming out of this unscathed. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. Then I remembered her cruel smile, her cold words. She made her choice, Alex. She chose to align herself with Richard. Now she can deal with the consequences. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another incoming call. Courtney. I hesitated for a moment before answering. You bastard, she hissed. I know this was you. I have no idea what you're talking about, Courtney, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Don't play dumb. This has your fingerprints all over it. Do you have any idea what you've done? I felt a surge of anger. What I've done? That's rich, coming from you. How does it feel, Courtney, to watch your perfect little world crumble around you? You'll regret this, Jonathan. I swear to God, you'll regret this. Goodbye, Courtney, I said. Hanging up, I turned my attention back to the TV. Richard was being led out of his office building in handcuffs, a sea of reporters shouting questions at him. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mark. Mission accomplished. Drinks tonight to celebrate? I typed back a quick reply. Absolutely. We've earned it. As I watched Richard being shoved into a police car, I felt a mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a nagging sense of unease. I'd crossed a line, one I'd sworn I'd never cross. The ethical businessman I'd once been was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. But as I thought about Eva, about the life Courtney and Richard had tried to steal from me, I pushed those doubts aside. This was war, and in war, there were casualties. Richard and Courtney had fired the first shot. I'd simply returned fire. The old Jonathan was dead. Long live the new Jonathan. The courthouse loomed before me, a monument to justice that now felt like a cruel joke. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and pushed through the heavy doors. My lawyer, Sarah, met me in the lobby. Jonathan, I need to prepare you. This isn't going to be easy. I nodded, my jaw clenched. I know, but we've got a strong case, right? After everything that's happened with Richard, Sarah shook her head. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that we're in a no-fault divorce state. Courtney's actions, while morally reprehensible, don't impact the division of assets or custody arrangements. My stomach dropped. So you're saying? I'm saying we need to be prepared for the worst. Courtney's lawyer is pushing hard for half of everything and sole custody of Eva. I felt the anger rising in my chest. That's insane. After what she did. Sarah put a hand on my arm. I know it's not fair, Jonathan, but we need to keep our cool in there. Any outburst will only hurt our case. We entered the courtroom. Courtney was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She didn't even look at me. The judge entered, and we all rose. As we sat back down, I caught Courtney's eye. There was no remorse there, just cold determination. The proceedings began, a blur of legal jargon and accusations. Courtney's lawyer painted me as an unstable, violent individual, using the video from the reunion as evidence. When it was our turn, Sarah did her best to portray me as a loving father and ethical businessman who had been the victim of a cruel setup. Your Honor, Sarah argued, my client has been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage. He built his business from the ground up, adhering to strict ethical standards. Courtney's lawyer jumped in. Standards he was quick to abandon when it suited him. Let's not forget the recent scandal involving Mr. Blackwell, which my client believes was orchestrated by Mr. Wilson. The judge held up a hand. Those allegations are not part of this proceeding. Let's stick to the facts at hand. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, I've reached a decision. My heart pounded as I listened to the judge's ruling. Despite everything, despite the evidence of Courtney's betrayal and manipulation, the law was clear. Given the nature of our no-fault divorce laws, the court orders an equal division of all marital assets. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sarah squeezed my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. The judge continued. As for custody of the minor child, Eva Wilson, the court grants primary custody to the mother, Courtney Wilson, with visitation rights for the father, Jonathan Wilson, to be determined. The room spun around me. I vaguely heard Sarah whispering that we could appeal, that we'd fight this. But her words seemed to come from far away. As the court adjourned, Courtney walked past me, a triumphant smirk on her face. I told you you'd regret crossing me, Jonathan. I stood, my fists clenched at my sides. Sarah grabbed my arm. Not here, Jonathan. It's not worth it. I watched as Courtney left the courtroom, taking with her half of everything I'd worked for and, more importantly, my daughter. Outside the courthouse, I leaned against a pillar, trying to catch my breath. Sarah stood beside me, her face etched with concern. What now? I asked, my voice hollow. Sarah squared her shoulders. Now, we fight. We'll appeal the custody decision. And in the meantime, we focus on rebuilding. You did it once, Jonathan. You can do it again. I nodded, a sturdy determination settling over me. Courtney and Richard might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. As I walked away from the courthouse, I made a silent promise to myself and to Eva. I would rebuild, stronger than ever. And someday, somehow, I would make things right. 2 years. It had been 2 years since that day in the courtroom, 2 years of fighting, struggling, and clawing my way back to the top. I sat in my new office, looking out over the city skyline. My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. Mr. Wilson, your 2 o'clock is here. I took a deep breath, straightening my tie. Send them in. The door opened, and a nervous-looking young man entered. I stood, extending my hand. Mr. Chin, welcome. Please, have a seat. As he sat down, I could see him taking in the office, the view, the clear signs of success. Mr. Wilson, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I smiled, remembering my own early days. Of course. Now, tell me about this app idea of yours. As Mr. Chen launched into his pitch, I found my mind wandering to the journey that had brought me here. After the divorce, I'd thrown myself into work with a fervor that surprised even me. Every setback, every obstacle, only fueled my determination. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mark. Just saw the stock prices. Congrats, man. You did it. I smiled, remembering our conversation from a year ago. Jonathan, are you sure about this? Mark had asked, his face creased with worry. Starting over from scratch, it's a huge risk. I nodded, my mind made up. It's the only way, Mark. I can't rebuild on a foundation that Courtney and Richard tainted. I need a clean slate. And so, Wilson Enterprises was born. A new company, built on the lessons I'd learned from my fall and subsequent fight back. Mr. Chin's voice brought me back to the present. And that's why I believe this app could revolutionize the industry. I nodded, impressed despite myself. It's an interesting concept, Mr. Chan. I'd like to have my team look it over, if you're amenable. His face lit up. Of course. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I can't tell you how much this means to me. As I showed him out, my assistant approached. Mr. Wilson, you have a call on line 1. It's about Eva. My heart skipped a beat. Despite my professional success, my relationship with my daughter remained strained. Courtney had done everything in her power to limit my access, poisoning Eva against me with lies and half-truths. I picked up the phone. This is Jonathan Wilson. Mr. Wilson, this is Mrs. Thompson, Eva's teacher. I gripped the phone tighter. Is everything all right? Mrs. Thompson sighed. Mr. Wilson, I'm concerned about Eva. She's been withdrawn lately, acting out in class. I was hoping we could set up a meeting to discuss it. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of concern and hope. Of course. When would be a good time? As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opening I needed to reconnect with my daughter. My assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Wilson? The board is ready for your presentation. I nodded, gathering my thoughts. It was time to show the world what the new Jonathan Wilson was capable of. As I walked into the boardroom, I felt a sense of pride. 2 years ago, I'd been at rock bottom. Now, I was on the verge of turning Wilson Enterprises into a multi-million-dollar company. The room fell silent as I began my presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. 2 years ago, I made a promise. A promise to rebuild, to create something better than what came before. Today, I'm here to show you how we're going to take Wilson Enterprises to the next level. The persistent buzzing of my phone dragged me from a fitful sleep. I fumbled for it in the darkness, squinting at the screen. 2 missed calls from Courtney. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. Courtney hadn't contacted me directly in over a year, preferring to communicate through lawyers or not at all. As I debated whether to call back, my phone buzzed again. Another call from Courtney. I hesitated, then hit ignore. Whatever game she was playing, I wasn't interested. The last time I'd fallen for one of her tricks, it had nearly cost me everything. I got up, starting my morning routine. As I made coffee, my mind wandered to Eva. Our last visitation had been tense, Eva barely speaking to me. Courtney's influence was clear in every sullen look, every clipped response. My phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. With a sigh, I answered. Mr. Wilson? A gruff voice asked. Yes, this is he. This is Detective Ramirez with the City Police Department. I'm calling about your ex-wife, Courtney Wilson. My blood ran cold. What about her? Mr. Wilson, I'm afraid Ms. Wilson has been reported missing. We need you to come down to the station. And we need you to take custody of your daughter, Eva. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Missing? What do you mean, missing? And Eva? Is she okay? Eva is fine, sir. She's with Child Services now. We'll explain everything when you get here. As I rushed to get dressed, my mind raced. Courtney, missing? It didn't make sense. And Eva? After all this time, I was finally going to have her with me. The drive to the police station was a blur. As I walked in, I was immediately met by a stern-looking detective. Mr. Wilson? I'm Detective Ramirez. Thank you for coming so quickly. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Can you tell me what's going on? Where's Eva? Ramirez led me to a small room. Eva's fine. She's with a social worker now. We'll bring her to you soon. But first, I need to ask you some questions about your ex-wife. For the next hour, I answered question after question. When was the last time I'd seen Courtney? Did she have any enemies? Any reason to disappear? Finally, Ramirez leaned back. Mr. Wilson, I have to ask, where were you 2 nights ago? I blinked, taken aback. I was at home, working late. You can check with my assistant. She was on a video call with me until nearly midnight. Ramirez nodded, making a note. We'll do that. For now, let's get you set up with Eva. As if on cue, the door opened. And there she was. My daughter, looking small and scared and so much older than her years. Eva, I breathed. Standing up, she looked at me, her eyes wide and uncertain. Dad? I knelt down, opening my arms. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a small sob, she ran into my embrace. As I held her, I made a silent vow. Whatever had happened to Courtney, whatever came next, I would protect Eva. This time, I wouldn't let anyone come between us. Ramirez cleared his throat. Mr. Wilson, we'll be in touch. For now, take Eva home. And don't leave town. As we left the station, Eva's hand tightened mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Courtney's disappearance was a mystery, one that I had a sinking feeling would impact our lives in ways I couldn't yet imagine. A week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Having Eva back in my life full-time was a joy I'd almost forgotten, but it came with its own set of challenges. Years of Courtney's influence had left their mark, and rebuilding our relationship would take time. I was in the middle of helping Eva with her homework when my phone rang. Detective Ramirez's number flashed on the screen. Eva, sweetie, I need to take this call. Why don't you go get started on your reading? She nodded, gathering her books. As she left the room, I answered the phone. Mr. Wilson? This is Detective Ramirez. I need you to come down to the station. We have news about your ex-wife. My stomach dropped. What kind of news? There was a pause on the other end. It's better if we discuss this in person, sir. The drive to the station felt longer than ever. When I arrived, Ramirez was waiting for me. Mr. Wilson, please, have a seat. I sat, my heart pounding. Just tell me, Detective, what's happened? Ramirez took a deep breath. Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry to inform you that we found Courtney's body in an apartment on the outskirts of the city. The world seemed to tilt. Body? You mean she's... I'm afraid so, sir. She's dead. I leaned back, my mind reeling. Courtney, dead? It didn't seem possible. How? I managed to ask. Ramirez shook his head. That's the thing, Mr. Wilson. We're not sure. There are no obvious signs of foul play, but the circumstances are unusual. I looked up sharply. What do you mean, unusual? The apartment where we found her? It was rented under a false name, and we found evidence that she'd been living there for some time, hidden from everyone, including you and your daughter. My mind raced. But why? Why would she do that? Ramirez leaned forward. That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Wilson, and we're hoping you might be able to help us with that. For the next hour, I answered question after question about Courtney's habits, her friends, any enemies she might have had. But the truth was, I realized I knew very little about the woman Courtney had become in the years since our divorce. As the interrogation wound down, Ramirez fixed me with a steady gaze. Mr. Wilson, I have to ask, given your history with your ex-wife, is there anything you'd like to tell us? Anything at all that might be relevant to this investigation? I met his gaze, unflinching. Detective, Courtney and I had our differences. She hurt me, deeply, but I could never. Ramirez held up a hand. I understand, Mr. Wilson, but you should know, we'll be looking into everyone in Courtney's life, including you. As I left the station, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Grief for the woman I'd once loved, anger at what she'd done to me, concern for Eva, and underneath it all, a nagging fear. What if the police didn't believe me? What if they thought I had something to do with Courtney's death? I drove home in a daze, dreading the conversation I'd have to have with Eva. How do you tell a child that her mother is dead? Especially when that mother had done everything in her power to turn the child against you. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Eva watching from the window. She ran out to meet me, her face worried. Dad? What's wrong? Why did you have to go to the police station? I knelt down, taking her hands in mine. Eva, sweetie, we need to talk. It's about your mom. Months passed, a blur of police interviews, funeral arrangements, and long nights comforting a grieving Eva. The investigation into Courtney's death continued, but leads were scarce. The mystery of why she'd been living in that apartment, hidden from the world, remained unsolved. Through it all, I focused on Eva, on being the father she needed, on rebuilding the relationship that Courtney had worked so hard to destroy. It wasn't easy. There were nights when Eva would cry herself to sleep, asking questions I couldn't answer. Why had her mom left? Why hadn't she said goodbye? And underneath it all, the unspoken fear. Would I leave her too? One night, as I tucked Eva into bed, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. Dad, can I ask you something? I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything. She hesitated, then blurted out, Did you hate Mom? For what she did to you? The question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Eva's eyes searched my face, looking for any sign of deception. I continued, my voice soft but firm. Your mom was a complicated person, Eva. We both made mistakes. But she gave me the most precious gift in the world, you. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Eva's lip trembled, but she kept us apart. She told me you didn't want to see me. I felt a surge of anger at Courtney, quickly replaced by sadness. I know, sweetheart, and that was wrong of her. But she was hurt and scared, just like we all get sometimes. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it helps explain it. Eva nodded slowly, processing my words. Dad, do you think Mom loved me? My heart broke at the uncertainty in her voice. Oh, Eva, your mom loved you more than anything in this world. Never doubt that. Whatever happened between us, her love for you was real and strong. Eva threw her arms around me, burying her face in my chest. I held her close, feeling her tears soak through my shirt. I miss her, Dad, she whispered. I know, sweetie. I know. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad and angry and confused. We'll get through this together, I promise. As Eva's sobs subsided, I gently laid her back down, tucking the blankets around her. Try to get some sleep, okay? I'll be right down the hall if you need me. She nodded, her eyes already drooping. Love you, Dad. I love you too, Eva, more than you'll ever know. I quietly left her room, leaving the door cracked open. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. These conversations never got easier, but I knew they were necessary. Eva needed honesty, needed to know she could trust me with her fears and doubts. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing with plans for the day. As I made breakfast, Eva shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas. Morning, Dad, she yawned. Good morning, sunshine. Sleep okay? She nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Can we go to the park today, like we used to? I smiled, remembering our weekend trips to the park before the divorce. That sounds perfect. How about we pack a picnic? Eva's face lit up. Really? Can we invite Sarah too? I paused, spatula in hand. Sarah was my assistant, who'd become something of a friend to Eva over the past few months. Sure, if you'd like. I'll give her a call after breakfast. As we ate, I watched Eva, marveling at her resilience. She'd been through so much, lost so much. Yet here she was, still able to find joy in simple things like a day at the park. Later, as we spread our picnic blanket under a large oak tree, Sarah joined us, carrying a frisbee and a bright smile. Hope I'm not intruding on family time, she said, settling down next to Eva. I shook my head. Not at all. We're glad you could make it. As Eva and Sarah tossed the frisbee, I leaned back against the tree, watching them. The sound of Eva's laughter, so rare these days, filled the air. Sarah caught my eye, giving me a thumbs up. I smiled back, grateful for her presence in our lives. She'd been a rock throughout the whole ordeal, helping with Eva when work kept me late, offering a sympathetic ear when the stress became too much. As the sun began to set, we packed up our things. Eva, tired from a day of play, leaned against me as we walked to the car. "Dad," she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart?" "This was a good day." I squeezed her shoulder. Yes, it was. That night, as I sat in my study going over some work emails, I found my mind wandering. The mystery of Courtney's death still loomed over us, a shadow we couldn't quite shake. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. We'd been through hell, Eva and I. We'd lost so much, faced challenges I never could have imagined. But we'd come through it, stronger, closer, more resilient than ever. I closed my laptop, decision made. The work could wait. Right now, my daughter needed me. And truthfully, I needed her too. I found Eva in the living room, curled up with a book. "Hey, kiddo, how about some ice cream and a movie?" Her face lit up. "Really? But it's a school night." I shrugged, grinning. "I won't tell if you won't." As we settled on the couch, bowls of ice cream in hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The future was still uncertain. The police investigation continued, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead. But right here, right now, with my daughter by my side, I knew we'd be okay. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. This was our new beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the movie started, Eva snuggled closer to me. "Love you, Dad," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. "Love you too, Eva. Always and forever." The mystery of what happened to Courtney remained unsolved, a puzzle piece that might never fit. But as I held my daughter close, I realized that maybe some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Maybe the real challenge, the real adventure, was in moving forward, in building a new life, free from the shadows of the past. And that's exactly what we were going to do. One day at a time, one moment at a time, Eva and I would write our own story. A story of love, of healing, of new beginnings. The credits rolled, but neither of us moved to turn off the TV. For now, we were content to just be father and daughter, survivors, a family. Whatever the future held, we'd face it together. And really, that was all that mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.